Welcome back to the Insider's Lounge. Today we have an experienced podcast guest. He's hosted his own podcast. He's been a guest on many. Dan, thanks for coming on, and feel free to give yourself an introduction.
Chad, thank you very much for having me. My name is Dan Rutstein. I'm President of Business Relations at Orange County Soccer Club. We play in the USL, the second tier of soccer in America, although I call it football because I'm obviously from England, the home of football.
I was going to say, that can't be an Orange County accent, I'll tell you from the start. We'll get things started here right from the beginning. Let's hear your earliest footballing memories and growing up in the UK.
I think growing up in England, in Britain, you grow up with football in just a completely different way. I've got a son here, and he plays basketball during every recess at school because there's a basketball court at every school. For us, as a kid, football was on the TV all the time. I played football every break time and lunchtime at school. We had a sort of concrete playground. We weren't allowed footballs. So I could do things with a tennis ball that I still can't do with a football, I think, nowadays. We grew up playing it. I became a fan of the mighty AFC Wimbledon, who currently play in the fourth tier in England, which people might know because Wrexham are now in our division, and we played them the other day, which means we'll probably be in the documentary. I grew up with a game, so I had a season ticket at Wimbledon. I'd watch their games, having played. I'd often play 3 or 4 times in a weekend. I thought I was a good player in my early teens, and I had trials at a couple of places, and it didn't quite work out. And I actually took up refereeing. So I ended up refereeing by the end of my career. I'd done a few international games. So I'd refereed a higher standard than I would have got to as a player. And then when I became a grown-up, one of my first jobs was as a journalist, and I became a sports journalist. So I've just sort of had football in me all the way through. And even when I've done other careers, I was a diplomat for the British government for a few years. Part of my job, I ended up going to football games. When British teams played German teams in the Champions League, I'd go and watch those games and sort of look after the team. So I've sort of managed to have football or soccer in my life all the way through, in a way that a lot of English people do. But I've reached peak football, which means I'm now president of a team. And I think my friends who I grew up with can't believe that there is such a job and that I get to live in California running a professional soccer team. But football's always been my passion, and to get to work in it every day is a real blessing.
I can say one of my key memories, Akinfenwa used to play for Wimbledon. Is that right?
He did.
That's about my only thing I know about Wimbledon, and we'll keep moving from there.
Yeah, I remember I went back. My wife, this is sort of one of those, this is the difference between people who like football and football fans. So Wimbledon got to the League One playoffs. So we go to Wembley and we're playing Plymouth Argyle, and League Two playoffs. So if we beat Plymouth, we go up to League One. So I said to my wife, I want to go to this game. So I flew back to England from Los Angeles, which is an 11-hour flight. I went back for 36 hours. So I basically flew overnight, landed, went straight to Wembley, watched us win. Akinfenwa was not our normal penalty taker, but we were 2-0 up, and we had a penalty, and he took the ball off the designated penalty taker. And who's going to argue with the person who's got the rating on FIFA for being the strongest? Because he knew it was his last game. We didn't know at that point. And he took the penalty, scored at Wembley, and obviously never played for the club again. So he didn't score the goal that got us promoted because we were ahead at that point. But I watched Akinfenwa play at Wembley, and then the next day flew back to Los Angeles. When you support a team, you do ridiculous things like fly halfway around the world for less than 2 days.
So we'll get into, we covered your early career and your early days growing up. We'll get more into your educational background. I always love to hear, everyone's different. Some go to university or post-secondary, some don't. You were one of those who did pursue a further education. Can you touch on what you actually completed? And I really like to know how those sort of topics that you worked on in university, how that affects you today, if that helps you in your role currently.
Yeah, I think this is, my understanding is that a lot of people do this differently. So in England, people study at university things that they are never going to do for a career afterwards. Now, my wife studied accountancy and is now a CFO. So she did it sort of in a linear way. And I know in places like Germany, you study the thing you want to work in. And I think to an extent you do in America. In England, you just do whatever you want to do, and then you do a completely different career. So I studied philosophy, politics, and economics. Now, um, I guess I became a diplomat, so I used the politics. But my first 10 years of my career, I was a journalist, and I didn't do politics, I didn't do economics, and I definitely didn't do philosophy. I think for me in England, it's about university is not really about what you learn; it's about how you change as a person. And I think moving away from home, growing, developing, finding out your passions. I played football at university, I refereed in the university league. I became a grown up and became used to the sort of getting myself ready for a working world, but I had no intention of becoming a philosopher or a politician or an economist. Um, I think one of the big things for me was my first week at university. They had a thing called we called it Freshers Fair. I'm assuming there's a similar thing in America. And you go along and you join all your different clubs. So I joined the football team and the tennis team and all
Okay.
that stuff. And there was a thing saying, "Do you want to study in America?" So I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds great. I think I want to do that." So I went and talked to these people and signed up. And I ended up we did 3 year degrees, and I spent my middle year in Toronto at university, at the University of York there. And I think that year there, going abroad not for the first time, but living abroad on my own for a year, but I fell in love with American sport at that point. So I'd go, because I was doing some work for the student newspaper, I had a press pass that got me into the Maple Leafs and the Blue Jays. I went to Argonauts games in the CFL. There was an indoor five-a-side league the Toronto Shooting Stars played in. Weirdly, Diego Maradona's brother played in this five-a-side league. It was such a weird, like as an English person watching indoor football was just very strange. But it gave me that whole concept of how Americans watch sport differently. So it's not just the game, it's the entertainment. Because when you've got 81 home games in baseball, people aren't going to watch every game. And their diehards are, but you're going for bobblehead night, dollar beer night, all that stuff. And I just fell in love with the whole concept of American sport. And obviously, fast forward 20 years, we're a football team, but we're an entertainment company. So we look at how to bring people into the stadium, and maybe a third of the people come because they want to see the players play and they'll know the score and they want to follow it. But other people are coming because it's a fun night out with a family. Some people are coming because of the different promotions or they're part of a group. And I think I didn't know it at the time, but I was learning a lot about the business of American sport while being a young English consumer living in North America.
Yeah, I think we'll build later on into that kind of entertainment value of a football club or a soccer club in the US and how it's different to the European side. But you mentioned your first approach into the industry was through journalism. Do you want to speak on how you first got into journalism and then you became a sports journalist and ended up in Bermuda? That sounds like a crazy story.
Yeah, I mean, so I did my school newsletter when I was a kid. I always liked writing. And then when I was at university, I wrote for the student newspaper, and I did work experience at our local paper. And when I graduated, I got a job on the York Evening Press as a news reporter. So I did that for a few years, and I knew I wanted to work in sport. So when I was at university in Canada, I got a press pass, mostly to get free tickets for the sporting events. But I liked writing about sports, particularly ones I didn't know, like ice hockey, where I'd never seen a game until I went to one of those. Um, and I remember going to see the news editor at my paper and saying I'd like to become a sports reporter, and she said no. There's no sports jobs. You're better off on news. Don't move to sport. It's not what you want to do. So I went to speak to the sports editor and said, look, I can't come and work for you, but can I do, when your reporters are busy and there's an extra game that needs covering, can I cover it? And he's like, yeah, of course you can. And I hit the absolute jackpot. So in our patch that the newspaper covered, there was a team called York City who were in what is now, and they've dropped down now, but they were in the old fourth division. And then below that was non-league games, so like League 7, 8 and 9 that sort of don't really exist here, but non-league football. Average crowds of sort of 200 or 300. Good players who all used to be on the books of bigger teams that didn't quite make it. And so I started covering teams like Goole and Selby Town and these sort of Scarborough, these smaller teams. And so I'd cover their games. And then one year, I think it must have been 2000, Manchester United didn't play in the FA Cup for the first time. This was big. It was a big story. and instead they didn't play in the FA Cup because they were playing the Club World Cup instead. So all the newspapers wanted to write a story about the fact Man United were abandoning the FA Cup, which has parallels to the MLS teams withdrawing from the Open Cup, and that's another story.
Hmm.
And so Man United chose to play Selby Town in a friendly, and they were going to send their sort of under-18 team. And the day before the game, we found out that David Beckham and Alex Ferguson were going to come into this, and Paul Scholes was going to play as well. And fair play to the sports editor. The sports reporters all said, "Can we cover the game now? It's a big game." It's like, no, Dan does Selby Town. He's done the terrible games. He can do the good games. So I went and did this game. Stadium was packed, overflowing. Beckham was playing. Ferguson was there. I was a reporter, like standing next to the bench because I knew the guy who was a bouncer from a local nightclub who was doing security. So I was between the benches. And like after the game, Alex Ferguson asked me for me directions to get back to the freeway. So I started talking to Ferguson. I interviewed Beckham, and I got to do this game. And it was just, for a local paper reporter to interview Beckham is unheard of in a little paper in Yorkshire. And I think for me that was such a great sort of start for me in sport. And I knew I wanted to do sport. So I left that paper, went to work for a different paper. And then, slightly remarkably, I was waiting at the bus stop during the Commonwealth Games. The Commonwealth Games it's like the Olympics for Commonwealth countries. And I was covering that, and it was in Manchester. And I was waiting for the bus stop to go and watch some diving. And I met a guy who was the deputy sports editor for the paper in Bermuda, who was also going to watch some diving. And we spent the day trying to learn how to write about diving, a sport neither of us knew anything about. And by the end of the day, he said, "Look, I'm leaving soon. Do you want to replace me?" So I ended up going out to Bermuda and spent 3 years there. I started as a news reporter and then ended up as deputy sports editor there.
Crazy. Yeah, that's a wild story. I couldn't imagine. I'm sure you've got many more in behind that you're keeping a secret.
Yeah,
But
and so only
no, go
because
ahead.
it's interesting. So you're on an island covering local sport, and a lot of the people are just locals. But then there was a couple of exceptional ones that at the time they were good stories, but sort of wind forward to where we are now, they've ended up being bigger ones. So when you're from an island like Bermuda, anyone who's got, it's not a tenuous link, but anyone who's got a link to the island becomes somebody worth covering in the sports paper. And there was a middle linebacker for the New York Giants whose dad was Bermudian. So I started writing about this chap called Antonio Pierce. And so I'd go over and cover Giants games. He played for the Redskins for a while. Anyway, you wind forward what is now 20 years, and he's now the head coach at the Raiders. And he's a guy I used to write about all the time when I was in Bermuda, and it's amazing how well he's done. So I'm assuming they still write about him as Bermudian, but yeah, his dad was Bermudian, and now he's a head coach in the NFL, which is brilliant.
No, it's put me into a bit of shock because I'm thinking football, football, football. Now you're talking about different
Oh,
football.
sorry, yeah,
Bermuda.
American football, yes.
No, it's right though. Yeah, no, it's just a crazy story for sure. We'll get into the Orange County side of things. So you mentioned a little bit about it before. It's in the second division of U.S. soccer. We spoke a little bit about how MLS has withdrawn from the Open Cup. For people who don't know whether they're in the U.S. already and just aren't really soccer fans, or they're from an international place that might not have heard of Orange County, can you just describe what the club means to you and what the club actually is, and then your role within the club?
Yeah, so I think in a country where the top leagues are all self-sustaining, so you've got the NFL, you've got the NBA, you've got MLS. I'm not sure people realise there's a level below. So, basketball fans know there's a G League, but your casual fan might not know there's another level. And I think that definitely applies to soccer. And I must confess, I didn't know Orange County Soccer Club existed. I didn't know the USL existed, even though I'm a football fan, when I first moved here, because MLS is what's on TV, so that's what it is. But the second tier of American soccer is vibrant. We are a fully professional team. We've been selling out the last 7 games of the year in front of 5,500 people in our soccer-specific stadium. It's not some weird, like, shared with baseball or playing on American football lines on turf. It's a beautiful little soccer stadium with mountains and palm trees in the background. And we play in the second tier. So it's a national league, split into conferences. We play teams all over the West Coast, but we travel off to Miami and Hartford and play teams over there. All the games are on ESPN Plus. Like, it's, if you don't know it, it's real soccer. And I think part of the frustration with people about MLS withdrawing from the Open Cup is every year in the Open Cup, USL teams beat MLS teams, which might be part of the reason why they're withdrawing. I think the top of the USL can beat the bottom of the MLS probably regularly. And if you come to our games, a third of our players have played in the MLS. We've had the former MLS Rookie of the Year is our centre back. So we've got players who've played. We've had players who've played at a World Cup in our team. So it definitely is. It's real soccer, but it's in a community background. We're a small team. The fans know the players, and the players, some of the players follow the fans' kids on Instagram. The ones who are soccer players. Like, it's a whole community family club. And I basically run everything that's not soccer. So the coaches and the players are nothing to do with me. We have a president on the soccer side who's in charge of scouting, player sales, motivating the players, hiring the coaching staff, all that stuff. I do everything else. So sponsorship, merchandise, broadcast, tickets, government relations, because we're in a stadium owned by the local council. All of that stuff, all the media stuff, marketing, that all sits with me.
So you mentioned the stadium obviously being soccer specific, and you mentioned the government relations there. One of the key topics I wanted to get towards, and one of the issues you've had recently, is actually renewing that lease with the stadium and with the county. Can you mention the overall problem? What happened, and how did you kind of work through it? Because as I was researching, I saw you in the court speaking for everyone. The fans were there with you. It looked like a very, like you said, that family environment is really key.
Yeah, so I've been with the club for 3 seasons now, but I've only been as president for just over a year. And I took over last summer as president. Somebody else, our old president, moved off to Pittsburgh. And he joked with me when he left. He said, "I'm going to Pittsburgh because they own their own stadium." We all had a good laugh about it. And then 7 days later, the local council published their agenda, and there's an agenda item there where LA Galaxy are asking for exclusive use of our stadium for their reserve team, their MLS Next Pro team, which would have seen us thrown out the stadium and have nowhere to play for the following season. So we started a legal battle. We started a sort of PR battle. We raised our fans. We told our story. I ended up on ESPN, on Football Americas, on Sirius XM, telling this story of, just frankly, this sort of big bad MLS team trying to throw a community team out of their stadium. A team who've literally got Orange County in their name, and the team with literally LA in their name were trying to take our stadium away. And we had this campaign, and I think for me it was a real turning point for our relationship with our fans. So obviously our fans come to the games, we like them coming to our games, they support our team, it's all wonderful. But I don't think you know what you've got until someone tries to take it away from you. And we did a rallying cry, and scores of our fans turned up at a council meeting, in their orange, singing songs, holding up scarves, to sort of say to the council, "Please don't throw this team out." And I had to stand up and give a speech, and I was trying to work out what to say. And I ended up quoting the former England manager, Bobby Robson. And I did this whole speech about what is a fan. And I think it's about that community. It's about that relationship between the players and the fans and the venue. It's not just about money, which is the sort of American sporting model to an extent. It's much deeper than that. And I think, we saved the stadium. It increased our bond with our fans. And then we spent basically the next year rebuilding relationships with the city. I had to call on all my diplomatic skills from my old life. And it worked. In October, we signed a 10-year deal to stay at the stadium, which completely transforms the future of the club. Everything from how the stadium is branded to potentially selling naming rights, giving fans certainty that our 10-year-old club will stay in that one stadium for at least another 10 years, which I think is transformative. And, the fans are grateful, and we're all excited for next year because we now have a real home. And I think the relationship between the club and the fans has never been stronger because somebody nearly took it away from us.
And one of the key ways we connected was actually through LinkedIn, through several different posts of either you posting or there was another article that we kind of both commented on, and we connected through that. And one of the first things I realized was your unique approach to how you've worked with the club and these ideas that you're bringing into, like you said, it's a very different scale when you're not the top league in MLS, and you have to find new ways to bring in this family and this environment and a fan culture. Two points that I found really interesting. One was the way you're selling shares of the club to your fans. I want you to speak on that a little bit. And similarly, the new NFT project that you're working on with the owner's pass, and it's kind of a similar sense in how you're working with Orange County. You want to touch on those two topics?
Yeah, I think we've always looked at trying to find unique ways of working with the community, and you know I remember I'm not from America. I've not worked in minor league baseball, which some people are sort of equivocate our teams with. So I'm trying to sort of bring things I know from my world of other businesses and what I know from English football and sort of bring it together and try and do something here. And that's everything from we were giving away free tattoos last year, where our fans would get like, the mascot's face, and not temporary tattoos, permanent tattoos. Like we're just trying to do things differently. And I think for me, one of the things I've always wanted to do, is create some kind of ownership opportunity. So I am an owner of AFC Wimbledon. Um, my team in England did a fundraise, and they had all sorts of terrible things happen to a club, which is enough material for a whole extra podcast. But I ended up becoming an owner, and I think owning a football team is like being a vegan. Like everyone knows pretty much straight away because you tell them. And I, I'm an owner of that club, and my friends know I am, and I wear their merchandise, and I'm proud because I'm not just a fan. I have a stake in the club, and it's something I've always wanted to do here. And we couldn't really do it before because we didn't have a home. But now we've got the 10-year stadium deal. It changed our ability to do this. So we launched fan-based ownership scheme. So we put 5% of the club up for fans. So you can invest anywhere between $100, which is sort of going to the pub and telling your friends you own a soccer team amounts. But we've got people coming in at $5, $10, $25,000 because this is a real investment in a league where the valuations of the teams in our league are growing, and sport in this country is growing, and our league is growing, and I think there's a real investment to be made. And a few weeks in, we've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from hundreds of people, and by the time we've finished, we'll be north of $1 million from thousands of people. And I think just gives people a different way to interact. So our season ticket holders and core fans can now say they're owners, but actually people all over the world are becoming owners of the club. People who may never come to a game, but they want to be part of this story. And I hope, Chad, that if it doesn't conflict with your podcasting, that you come in as an owner as well.
Definitely, and I'd like to visit. I'm sure that's one of the benefits of being an owner is you're allowed to go watch the games. That's not an issue.
Absolutely.
We'll get into the so you have this one. It's kind of interesting. Your life is. As I was researching, you have all these different interests and ways you do things. So obviously, your career now is you're working with Orange County. But like we mentioned previously, you do a lot of podcasting. So you have a few podcasts of your own, and I can see you have different passions based on your podcast. Can you
Yes.
touch on each of the podcasts and how you do them?
Yeah. So I've been a guest on loads of podcasts before, and I thought I really want to start my own. And when I worked for the British government as a diplomat, you're not allowed to do any of this sort of stuff. When I left, I set up my first one was a whiskey podcast. I collect whiskey. I love whiskey. So I thought I'll do a podcast where basically it's like comedians in a car getting coffee, but with something a bit stronger. So I sit down with people and have a whiskey, and we talk. And we've had everyone on there, from the actor who played Chunk in the Goonies to the head of the CIA station in Russia to the man who flew Richard Branson to space as a spaceship pilot. We've had fascinating people on. We just have a whiskey together, and it was such a great way of meeting new people for me, including during the pandemic. I lost my job during the pandemic because I was running a tech company, and unfortunately, we ran events at trade shows, and there was no trade shows because of the pandemic. And a guy I used to work for said, "Oh, you should meet the owner of Orange County Soccer Club. He likes whiskey." So I said, "I don't know who Orange County Soccer Club are, but that sounds fun." So he came as a guest on my show, and one thing led to another, and I now run his team. So podcasting is a great way of opening doors. I've got a football podcast, America the Beautiful Game, where I interview people about football and the relationship between America and Europe, so sort of that transatlantic relationship. So I've had players and commentators and coaches and so on that one. And then I have a Hollywood podcast called Screaming into the Hollywood Abyss. And we interview showrunners and directors and producers about how hard it is to make TV shows and movies. And that's been, a friend of mine's a writer, and we co-host that together. He's a writer on NCIS Hawaii. And it's it's an industry I don't really understand, but I'm learning a lot about it. And we've had some great people on. I think one of the most interesting was Bill Lawrence, the guy who created Ted Lasso. So he came on the show to talk about that. And even that, one of the best TV shows you'll ever see, every network turned them down before they were finally accepted by Apple. So I think the whole show's about overcoming failure, which has got value for that industry, but I think it also some great life lessons for everybody because, the journey to overcome failure is what defines a lot of people. And you see that in every sports career from, Messi being told he was too small when he was a kid to players being let go by teams and then going on to succeed. I think there's some great life lessons there. And I like the chance to meet new and interesting people. And I think that's where I've ended up with, about 260 episodes of podcasts because I get to sit down and meet new and interesting people. And that includes being a guest. And it's great to be on yours, Chad, because, podcasts connect people. And I think that's wonderful.
That's the exact inspiration behind mine. I took a trip for 5 months across Europe. I did like 18 countries, 60 cities, had like 30 plus meetings with football individuals, whether it was executives of clubs, coaches, players, you name it. And I got back and I was looking at my bank account. I was like, that's not healthy. So I got to find a new way to meet people. And so this was the option. And ever since then, I'm at almost 20 episodes. So I'm at about a tenth of what you've done, but I'd be more than happy to do just as many as you've completed because it's a truly interesting way to interact with people. And now, like we were mentioning earlier, now I'm going to LA in a few weeks and we'll be able to meet in person. And I'm sure it'll feel like we've been almost lifelong friends just because we've had
100%.
one simple conversation.
So what was your favorite sporting city in Europe during all your travels?
Sporting city. So one of my favorite, I'll say, moments that I had was I went to a Dortmund game. We were facing the yellow wall, so it was obviously iconic, and they won 6-1, and it was Bellingham's, I want to say, second last game, maybe third last game. And just the fact they won 6-1, I got to see that stadium and feel that stadium and experience the 6 goals. And I was actually in the away end, and we had to kind of sneak in and just get away just to find the last ticket. That was truly inspiring. But just seeing Europe is so connected, but it's also so disconnected, and you only realize that once you're there. There's a lot of many similar things when you're at the big cities. Like if you go to Madrid and Milan, I felt it was almost the same city. But then when you truly get into the roots of the culture and deep into the countryside, you start to realize those differences. And so just attending different games I was watching U12 games in Lisbon all the way to a women's game in London, one of the Premier League games there. And I really got to see, like, this is football. And I grew up loving watching football, but I really got to experience, like, this is the true passion. And I see where and why people love the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I've been to Champions League games at Dortmund and at Borussia Mönchengladbach and Cologne. And my old company had a box at Anfield, so I've been to plenty of games there. When I was a kid, Wimbledon were in the old First Division, which became the Premier League. So, I've watched Wimbledon play, Arsenal and Man United and all that sort of stuff. But I think for me, the most interesting part has been when I was a journalist, I covered a sports journalist in England. I covered rugby. It's my main job. But then I covered a non-league team, Bradford Park Avenue. And they play it was the Unibon North, so it'd be sort of the 6th tier. So I got used to going to these grounds where the crowd's between 500 and 1,000. My Wimbledon team have been promoted from the 13th division to the 4th division. So I've been watching games, again, sort of non-league games. I refereed in the 5th tier in England. So again, these sort of smaller grounds, 500 to 1,000 people. And even in Bermuda, I refereed in the Bermuda Premier League, And I did the Bermuda Cup final a couple of times where there was sort of, I think, 5 or 6 thousand. But I've spent more time in the sort of 2,000 to 6,000 stadiums than I have in the obvious TV sort of teams. And I think part of why I love Orange County so much is we're in that level where it's real fans who've got real connections with the club and with the community and the players in a different way. And I'm not saying I'd never want to work at the top level, but I think there's something you can make a difference at this level in a way that
Mm.
you just can't do when you're with the behemoth teams. So that for me is the essence of football is going to a stadium and being in the tunnel before the game where you've got all the little kids who are the mascots for the day holding hands with the players, the excitable parents, the kids leaning over the balcony at the top of the tunnel trying to get high fives from their favourite players, and the players knowing those kids' names. Like that's what it is. That's what I love.
For those listening, I have my background is actually all the scarves of the games that I got to attend while I was there. And Újpest is another one right at the top here in Hungary, in Budapest. Same thing as what you're talking about. The stadium maybe has a max capacity of three to 4,000. And the game I went to was around 1,500 to 2,000 fans, and it was one of the best football experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
I felt like family by the end of the game. I was yelling at the opposition players, even though I didn't even know the language. But you just felt that different sense of community, and I think that's what you've been able to not only join at Orange County but also build on.
Yeah, and I think we do. There's a couple of things we do. So we do a thing called the Corporate Cup. So local companies can put a team in, and we play a tournament near the end of the year on a Friday night. We rent our stadium's in a complex with about 24 fields. We bring in all these teams. They 7 aside co-ed, and people play these games against each other. So it's the local accountancy firm against the local car dealership, all that sort of stuff. And the top two teams, they get to play the final on in the stadium after one of our games. So we play our game, then the players leave, they go into the dressing room, they get changed, and they go out on the field. And watching these sort of middle-aged, out of shape people playing on the real stadium, the joy in people is extraordinary. And at the end of the year, we do a staff versus partners game. So all our staff play against one representative from each of our sponsors. And again, seeing these people like reliving their childhood on the stadium, they've been watching games all year, and at the end of the year, they get dressed in the locker room. Our coach came and gave them sort of a pep talk. Probably his worst coaching performance because he didn't have a lot to work with and their formation wasn't great. But we all get to play in the stadium, including me, and I'm nearly 50, and I'm playing in goal in a 5,500 seat stadium. Now, there might only be 23 people watching, but that's sort of not the point. And I think we can bring joy to each other, and we all have a drink after the game. And I think that community connection is just what separates these clubs from the bigger clubs. And obviously, looking at your scarves, you've got half of them are enormous teams. But as you say, I bet the most interesting games were the little stadiums.
Mm. And you mentioned the kind of community aspect with the just the general businesses in the area playing in those games. I think people have an attraction to kind of that amateur level soccer, similar, like, I don't know if you know the Sidemen, the UK YouTube group. They have a massive charity event each year where millions end up watching. Really just video game streamers and YouTubers play soccer. Some have never played in their life. Some have been playing all over their life, but you really get to see that true like amateur aspect. And it's just a passion for football and a passion for individual people and in a community in a sense. And that's what makes it entertaining.
Absolutely.
We'll get into a day in the life of Dan. I think people really find this fascinating. You see sometimes in coaching or players, they'll make a YouTube video on a day in the life of Virgil van Dijk or whoever it is featuring. But sometimes you really don't get to see the people behind the scenes and what they do on a day-to-day basis in order for us as fans to be able to watch a game. So can you get into a day in the life of Dan and what your role looks like?
Yeah, and I think, particularly, we're effectively a startup. That's how I see it from a business point of view, and I've worked at startups before. So, we do get involved in everything. So I think, a typical day, say, midweek during the season, I'd probably have a meeting with a potential sponsor to talk about either how their partnership's going and, how we could do things sort of differently, throughout the year. I'd sit down with the ticket teams. We bring up our game day summary. We look at where ticket sales are for the game, which parts of the stadium are selling well. Do we need to do any promotions? And then we'll have a meeting, like a game prep meeting, where we're doing everything from who are the ball boys, who's going to be the anthem singer, who's going to be the honorary captain, what's the halftime entertainment going to be, who's going to be the PA announcer. There's a lot of really granular stuff, which I really love. I think for me, one of the things I've enjoyed the most is the national anthems, because you don't get them in England at games. So we love it here. We've had a few friends of mine work in Hollywood, so we've had sort of American Idol finalists come on. We had this amazing guy doing a sort of Jimi Hendrix style electric guitar national anthem, where he's playing with his teeth and behind his head. We've had some really interesting. We have mariachi bands, school choirs. I think it's a really great, again, the community aspect. I'll sit down with the merch team. I'll look at sort of designs for new merchandise. We'll work out what's selling well. So we, get into the real detail. Let's order some more scarves and let's do this. And then, it's one of these. Like every job, there's a load of boring stuff. I have to sit down with the finance team and look at the budgets and the accounting and speak to HR about some issue and make sure somebody's time off numbers match what's in the system. So it's one of those things where it's not all glamour. No job is all glamour. There's a lot of normal work stuff. When you're on the front office, there's a lot of dealing with that stuff. Then I'll talk to the technical team. We'll talk through, the players who are injured for the game ahead, who we're going to say is injured, who we're not going to say because we don't want to give it away to the opponents. What's going to be in the marketing campaign for that particular game. The design team will show me all the posters and all that stuff for the game. We'll plan out the social media. So it's really granular stuff. Then we'll probably call the operations team and, they'll tell us that 2 of the seats are broken and we got to replace them, and 3 security guards have pulled out for the game, so we need to hire more staff, because it's it's an event a week. So, and a team of our size, everyone's getting involved in that. So, we're running a business, but then, we hire game day. There's a couple of hundred people there, the ushers and the hot dog salesman and a food truck that we need to, increase the offering. So it's a very, at this level, I'm not a micromanager, but I have to be involved in all these different elements. And I think it's what makes it so fun for me is, at the end of the day, it's all football. So it's an HR problem, but it's an HR problem for a football team. It's a consumer goods and e-commerce selling, but it's, how are our replica jerseys selling, and can we get on, how do we get into one of these sort of kit websites to get this promoted? When it's about ticketing, again, it's like live events and managing all of that stuff. And I think it's a really interesting and varied job on a front office, particularly at a smaller club. But it's fun, and you see it on game day. The clever idea that somebody came up with midweek for a halftime show, it makes a difference. A sponsor who's asked to do something specific for a game, or a giveaway that you've done, that you go in the stadium, and the stadium's different because everyone's got thunder sticks, or the deck's been sold out, or a child who's recovered from illness has gone out holding hands with the captain and is our honorary captain for the day. We're a memory making business. At the end of the day, we're a football club, we're an entertainment club, but people are in that stadium and they're making memories with their friends, with their grandparents, with their children. Years from now, they will look back at, the goal that was scored in the playoff game. And it might not even be an important game or an important moment, but it will be the thing they shared together, the player who sort of crashed into the advertising hoardings just in front of them and they had to move out the way. They'll never forget those moments. And I think that's what it's all about. There's nothing like live sport.
The football industry is really one like a roller coaster, where it has your highs and lows, and it's a constant just sway of back and forth. And I'm sure within your career and also your personal life, you've had the same of many highs and lows. What are some of those greatest challenges that you've had to overcome, and how have they helped you now in your day-to-day that have kind of boosted you to a new level?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad. I think it's a couple of things. So I think personally for me, obviously the global pandemic was terrible for for very many reasons for very many people in terms of people's health. But from my point of view, I was working for a company. The business was effectively killed by the pandemic. I was laid off for the first time. I've been in government where you sort of can't really get fired. And then, I was laid off. My kids' school was shut for 15 months. I was homeschooling the kids. I'm not going to say I became an alcoholic, but there were days I was drunk by lunchtime. Like it was definitely not great. And I got introduced to somebody. He came on one of my podcasts. We got drunk together, but in the evening, so it was okay. And then I started working for the team, and I ended up. That was sort of back end of 2020. In 2021, the season was a weird start to the year. I think we played behind closed doors for the first couple of games, and then it was very limited, sort of 500 fans, whatever it was. And then we just had this amazing run. The bit in the middle with a blip, we fired our coach, we brought a new guy in. We ended up winning. We won the championship. And the first flight I took in 18 months was to Tampa Bay to go to St. Petersburg to see us beat Tampa Bay Rowdies 3-1. And I remember standing on the field, getting my obligatory picture holding up the trophy. I remember thinking what a crazy, it was 15 months. I went from sort of losing my job to being part of a team that won a championship. And I remember, I think it might be my backdrop on LinkedIn. It certainly used to be. The game was live on ESPN, so it's nationally televised. And we were sitting behind the bench. So I kept getting texts from friends of mine saying, "You're on national TV." And I was sitting there on ESPN. And, after the game, we ran on the field. And it was a real high and low. So I went from, losing my job and becoming a bit of an alcoholic to, being part of this winning championship team. And I think for me, that was a huge sort of how you revisit your life during a global pandemic. And I think for me, that was my journey. And I think sort of professionally for our club and our fans, going from being 7 days away from losing our stadium to signing a 10-year deal within 12 months was a complete game changer. And I think our club is so strong now, and we've got hundreds, soon to be thousands of new owners. And frankly, it started because somebody nearly took our whole club away from us. And I think that's going to be the DNA of Orange County Soccer Club is we were nearly killed by an MLS team. And look how strong we are now. And I think they're my two stories.
Mm-hmm. And one of the key inspirations for me when I was building the podcast, I was speaking on a networking aspect. It was really important. But also when I was growing up, I was always looking for inspiration on the sports business front of football and trying to find positions that are available. And there's not really a lot of coverage around that besides the on the field and the players and coaches. For someone that's looking or listening now to this podcast and thinks that your career choice or the way you've built your career up is something that they are willing to follow as well, or that they would like to build towards, do you have advice for someone like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love this sort of part of it. I think part of my job now, I run a team, is to help the next generation of people who want to work in it. I spend a lot of time with sort of local university graduate programs, going to talk to them about, people doing sort of sports management, talk to them about it. I think, certainly in this country, the route in is, we have an internship program and we are not unique in that. And I think there was one stage where 50% of our staff used to be interns. So people would come, and obviously the way it works, I think in America, you get sort of credit while you're at university for doing these programs. Mm. So they'd come in and they'd do all sorts of things. We've had people, they'd be selling T-shirts at the game, but then it'd also be doing data analytics on where our fans are buying tickets and when they're buying tickets. So depending on what their skill set is, we've had marketing people help us with our TikTok, all that sort of stuff. So we bringing in people and interning with us, learning about the club, and the good ones end up being offered jobs and getting promoted. So I think for me, you just got to go and do it. There are not, jobs are advertised. There's websites that have the sports jobs, but I think go and spend time with a team, understand the different aspects. And if you're good, they'll hire you. And that applies, I've spoken to people on graduate programs from major league sports teams. So we've got staff who used to work at, the Angels and at the Ducks. There is a lot of jobs, and they frankly don't pay brilliantly in sport. That's not what this is about. But it's, for me, to be in a job you're passionate about. You might earn 20% less than your friend who does a similar sales job for a faceless e-commerce company, or sitting in a cubicle at a bank somewhere. But working in sport is extraordinary. And I remember when we did our staff versus sponsors game, like watching my colleagues running around on the field. Yeah, it was sort of the culmination of a year of hard work. You're a real team. Like it can get stressful. You've got matches, you've got a game you've got to sell out that starts in 24 hours. You've got there's a lot to do on game day, and it's not a normal job. But if you love sport, there's nothing better than being in a stadium knowing that you contributed to that success. And we in the front office have nothing to do with the players. If the team wins, it's not really to do with us. Now, there is an element of, if we can fill the stadium, it gives your players a home advantage, but you can't control what's on the field. But being in a team, when we win games, when we win playoffs, the front office guys running around high-fiving each other, we're all on the field hugging the players. It's like being a fan, but it's your job, and there's no better feeling. So I think for young people, if you love sport and you're prepared to do the funny hours for low pay, go and get an internship at your local team and just work your way up, because we want passionate people. And a lot of people will drop out. They'll start a family and realize they need to do something else. But the ones who stick to it can have the most wonderful careers.
And looking forward, we've been speaking on how Orange County has been so close to falling apart, really, in a sense. And even within your own career, you've had your own issues. But looking forward, we're wrapping up 2023 now. We're heading into 2024. Do you have personal goals as well as goals for Orange County that you're looking to achieve in 2024?
And I think professionally, this off-season is unlike any other for our team. So we signed a stadium deal. We have nearly 1,000 new owners. We're going to build a different team. When you come to the home opener next year on the 23rd of March, when we play Miami, the stadium will just look like something you've not seen before. We're going to have different branding. We're going to have different activations. It's just going to feel like a different stadium. I think there's a lot of work going on in the off-season to really maximise this new opportunity the club have got. How do we engage our owners? How do we make the most of this new stadium deal? There's a lot we're about to change. Kit supply, there's a lot of new stuff happening. And it's going to be a really exciting off-season. I think it's going to make for a fascinating and exciting year for our team. We got to the second round of the playoffs. A lot of the players are coming back. So I think on the field, nothing to do with me, unfortunately, but I think we've got some really real excitement that's going to happen. So I think there's a lot. It's just going to be an amazing year next year. And we're very excited to sort of get on with it. I think personally for me, last year was my first full year in charge. So I took over at the back end of the year, had to sort of run around saving the stadium. And I think I learned a lot last off season at the beginning of last year, because I've never run a sports team before. I've run other businesses. And I think I made mistakes in the off season last year, and that was reflected in maybe lower crowds than we would have liked for the beginning of the year, and some other things that didn't really work well. And I think I know more now, and I think I can prepare our team better. We've got a great team. We've made some internal promotions. I think we're really sort of ready to go for next year. So I'm looking forward to leading my team off the field to the success that I hope my equivalence team on the field can achieve.
And quickly, before we get into the quick fire questions here, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? We'll do it the 10-year mark. So in 10 years, where do you think you'll be? So you can just give a quick rough.
Great question. I think there's a part of me that will still be at this club, but this club will be a completely different club, playing in a stadium with twice as many seats. Maybe there'll be promotion and relegation in our league by then. The club valuation will be higher. We'll have thousands of new owners, and we will have had hopefully a couple more stars to go with our 2021 victory. I don't want to not work in football. Now I'm in football, I can't imagine working elsewhere. Look, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe I'll be offered jobs at other teams. But for me, for now, the club's 10 years old. We've got a 10-year deal. I want to do everything I can to make sure that in the next 10 years, we maximise this opportunity to really, really solidify the club.
So we'll get into the quick fire questions. You mentioned previously Wimbledon was your boyhood club. What was the reasoning behind that? Just quickly, that you did you grow up close to the stadium? Is that kind of the
Yeah, geographically we were close to the stadium, but one of my teammates' granddad was best friends with one of Wimbledon's players, a guy called Alan Cork, who was known as Upside Down Head because he had no hair and a massive beard. And we had season tickets there from that, and I just became a fan of that club, and obviously now I'm an owner of that club, and I'm still trying to do a partnership between Orange County and AFC Wimbledon at some stage.
maybe one day? Favorite quote or saying that you live by?
So my favourite quote, it used to be on my business card in my last company because they did that sort of thing. And So the quote is it's Master Shifu from Kung Fu Panda talking to Po, and it's yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. And this has been a sort of, I know it sounds a bit ridiculous, and the fact that it comes from a cartoon, but I think making the most of the moment that you're in. Something I've always believed in is taking opportunities, like chatting to the guy at the bus stop in Manchester that ended up taking me to Bermuda. Inviting a guy on a podcast who ends up giving me a chance to run a soccer team. Like I've taken chances. I've moved to different countries, and I've really sort of seized the moment. And something I've always believed in doing. I think if the pandemic taught us anything, is that you've got to make the most of today because you genuinely don't know what's going to happen. And for me, every opportunity needs to be looked at, and you've got to live your life like you're never quite sure what you're going to do next. And you've got to seize the moment. And I think that for me is so important.
You've spent a few years now in Orange County. Do you have a top recommendation, whether it's a food spot or just somewhere you have to go see?
Ooh,
Other than an Orange County game, of course.
yeah, of course. I mean, obviously in Orange County again, I think that's a great question. I would probably say, actually, just because it's fascinating, and I'm scared of heights, but I still did it anyway. Is going up. There's a giant orange balloon in the Great Park, the Great Park balloon, and you can go up there. It's a tethered balloon, so the risks are a lot lower than an untethered balloon, and you have this extraordinary view over all of Orange County, including some great shots of the stadium. And I think that's something I always recommend that visitors do here.
One of the questions I always ask every guest, I really try and read. I think it's something that you can really help increase and expand your brain and your thinking patterns. Do you read, and if so, what is a favorite book or a book that you can recommend to
Yeah,
someone?
I definitely read less than I used to, but I actually live in LA and I commute to Orange County, and it's a hell of a drive. So it's between an hour and 2.5 hours every day in both each direction. So audiobooks have been my thing that I've now done. So when I'm not listening to podcasts, I listen to audiobooks. And I think the answer is anything by Ben Mesrick. So he's an extraordinary author. So he did the story that ended up being the movie, The Facebook, the social network. He did one
Mm.
about Bitcoin billionaires, about the Winklevoss brothers and what happened to them with Bitcoin. He's just done the new film about GameStop, Dumb Money. His books are brilliant. And the first one I read of his was the one that became the movie 21 with Kevin Spacey. And it was about card counting in Vegas. But he writes incredibly well. So anything by Ben Resnick is what I read, but I listen to instead of reading.
And then you had the Kung Fu Panda quote, and I think it was on your Instagram or something, that you do karate as well. Do you have other hobbies outside of soccer to just break the kind of mental space and do something different?
Yeah, so karate's. I started it during the pandemic. My son was doing it on Zoom, and I had to like join in and hold pads for him, and I sort of got into it. I'm a green belt. I'm probably 2 years away from a black belt. When you're nearly 50, karate is the most amazing thing. So I have a frustrating day at work, and I'll go out and I'll just start kicking people in the face, and it makes me feel a lot better. So you know, I'm definitely getting older, and I'm starting to fall apart a bit. And karate is just such a great way of staying fit. And all the people I do are 10 or more years younger than me, but it's a great release. And my aim is to be a black belt by the time I'm 50. And this is one of these things I always set myself targets. So, I wanted to run a marathon. I've run a couple of marathons. This is my new sort of non-work goal, because it's hard when you've got kids to find space for yourself. And I love all the stuff my kids do, but grown-ups need something that's not just making sure their kids are happy. And karate is my thing. Plus, I play in an over 40s team on a Monday night. I now have to move back into goal because I can't run around the pitch anymore. But I play in goal, and I'm obsessed with goalkeeping, and I watch goalkeeping videos all the time and get tips from goalkeepers. And I've now started filming my games so I can improve my positioning and all that stuff, even though I'll never be better than an over 45s goalkeeper. So I think playing football and karate and podcasting and drinking and collecting whiskey, I think that's all I've got time for.
No, that's a great combination. The last one here, if you could sit down with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
I know I'm probably going to say a celebrity at this point. I think it would be my grandfather on my dad's side, because he died when my dad was a kid. So obviously I never met him, and that's like the only. I was blessed to have three other grandparents, but that was the part of the family we never really got to understand. And he had a fascinating life, and I think that for me would be the missing piece.
No, that's great. This is a great episode. I'm glad you got to come on. Dan, if there's any last words you have just for the audience or anything you want to shout out, the Orange County Stadium, you name it, feel free to, and then we'll wrap things up.
Brilliant. Well, first of all, Chad, thank you very much for having me on. Like I say, I believe in the power of podcasting, and when we met in the comments of somebody else's podcast who I'd been on, it was great to sort of, and when you reached out and invite me on, I love coming on these things. I think it's great that you're doing this, and good luck with it. I can hopefully maybe suggest some other guests along the way if you need them. I think my final message would be, look, if you love real soccer, whether you're from Orange County or elsewhere, become an owner of Orange County Soccer Club. For just $100, you get to tell your friends you own a soccer team, and we are a special team. We're a community team, and didn't really talk about it much, but on the transfer side, we've sold 6 players to European teams now. We've sold people to Rangers, the Scottish champion, Feyenoord, the Dutch champions. We've sold somebody to FC Nordsjælland in Denmark. We're a global football brand, a community heart, global vision. And I think being part of our club's journey is being part of the journey of soccer in this country.
No, that was brilliant. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
Great. Thank you, Chad.
Have a good one.